There is something running inside you right now that works around the clock. Every single day, without a break, without a vacation, without asking for your permission. It is not your heart. It is not your lungs. It is an invisible system that decides, before you are even conscious of it, what gets to stay in your life and what needs to be pushed out. A thermostat. Except it does not control the temperature in the room. It controls the temperature of your reality. And today you are going to find out that the problem was never lack of effort, never lack of willpower, never lack of faith, discipline, strategy, or the right morning routine. The problem is that you have been trying to change the outcome without ever reprogramming the thermostat. And a thermostat set to 6 to 5 degrees will turn on the heat every single time the temperature climbs to 72. Not because it is broken, not because it wants to work against you, but because it was programmed to maintain what it knows, and what it knows is what it has decided is safe. Think about this for a moment. How many times have you gotten genuinely close to a real leap forward, financial, relational, professional, and out of nowhere something happened, an unexpected expense, a fight that came out of left field, a wave of exhaustion that pulled you off course right at the critical moment, a decision you knew, even as you were making it, that you should not be making, but you made it anyway. You called it bad luck. You called it bad timing. Maybe you called it self-sabotage and moved on without looking deeper. But what if it was none of those things? What if it was the thermostat doing exactly what it was built to do, bringing you back to the familiar temperature? In the previous episodes of this journey, we have walked through the territory of invisible loyalties and repeating patterns that look like bad luck from the outside, but are pure neuroscience on the inside. And if you have been with us on this train, you already know the loop is not an accident. It is architecture. But today we go one level deeper. Today we are not just talking about the pattern. We are talking about the biological mechanism that keeps it alive, even when you consciously want something completely different. And the most unsettling part of all, we are going to find out why your brain, the most sophisticated organ in the known universe, actively prefers the familiar over freedom. Before we go further, if you have not watched the previous episodes in this series, pause right now and go back to the beginning of Phase 3. Every episode in this mega-series was built as a step, and the steps you skipped have everything to do with how deeply what comes next is going to land. Hit the notification bell if you have not already, because what is coming in the next few episodes is the core of everything we have been building toward. Drop a comment below with one word. What is the familiar pattern you recognize most clearly in yourself? Do not overthink it. The first word that comes up is the most honest answer you have. And if this content has been valuable to you, the like button is a small thing that makes a real difference in getting this in front of people who need it. The quantum train is at the station. The regular passengers are already on board. Jung, Alan Watts, Joe Dispenza, Carl Rogers, Jordan Peterson, and Hélio Couto. But today there is a seat reserved for a guest who crossed the Atlantic to join this conversation. One of the most important neuroscientists of the 21st century. A man whose work dismantled one of the oldest and most comfortable illusions in Western science. The idea that the brain thinks independently of the body. We are waiting for Antonio Damasio. And the moment he steps through that door, everything you thought you knew about free choice is going to need to be revisited. The train begins to move. You have probably noticed that the people who complain most loudly about the life they have are often the same people who resist change most fiercely when it actually shows up. That is not hypocrisy. That is homeostasis. That is biology. That is the thermostat. And understanding this, not just intellectually but in your body, is the line between people who stay in the loop and people who finally get out of it. Let us start at the beginning. Your brain was not built to make you happy. It was built to keep you alive. And for a nervous system that spent millions of years evolving in environments where the unfamiliar meant predator, novelty is threat, growth is threat. Freedom, in pure biological terms, is threat. Because the familiar has data. The familiar has history. The familiar has a map. And the unknown, no matter how beautiful it might be, has none of the three. And this is where most personal development content gets it catastrophically wrong. It tells you to get out of your comfort zone, as if it were a matter of courage, as if you could just decide your way out. But nobody told you that the comfort zone is not a place. It is a temperature. And you cannot leave a temperature just because you decided to want warmth. When Antonio Damasio published Descartes' Error in 1994, he was not simply challenging a 400-year-old philosophical position. He was pulling the foundation out from under the entire Western psychological tradition, the assumption that reason and the body are separate operations, that you think with your head and feel with your body, and that rational thought, with enough effort, can override instinct. Damasio studied patients with damage to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain that integrates emotion and decision-making. These patients were intellectually intact. Normal IQ, perfectly functional logical reasoning. They could analyze a situation with precision, but they were completely unable to make good decisions in actual life. Why? Because they had lost access to somatic markers, the physical signals in the body that the brain uses to navigate the world before conscious reasoning even enters the picture. What Damasio discovered, and what permanently changed neuroscience, is that the body does not merely record emotional experiences, it builds maps. Somatic maps of every situation you have ever lived through, with the emotional charge attached. And when you face a new decision, the brain does not start from scratch, it searches the archive. It finds the closest existing map, and it uses that map to determine, in milliseconds, long before any conscious thought occurs, whether that situation is safe or dangerous, and which map is most completely registered in your body. The familiar one, because the familiar was lived. It was felt. It was mapped through repetition. The new, no matter how much you consciously want it, has no somatic map, no archive entry, no recognizable body frequency. And so, at the level of the nervous system, it gets treated as a threat, not because it is dangerous, but because it is unknown. And for your body, unknown and dangerous are the same word. Welcome, Damasio. Your seat was reserved from the moment this conversation began. Carl Jung said that what you resist persists. But there was a layer Jung had not mapped with the precision modern neuroscience now allows. Resistance does not live only in the psyche. It lives in the body. The Jungian shadow, that collection of aspects of yourself you do not recognize as your own, has an exact biological counterpart. It is the somatic map of everything that was suppressed, everything that was deemed threatening to relational survival, everything that had to be hidden so that you could be loved, accepted, included in the group. You did not repress something because you decided to. You repressed it because the body learned that it was expensive, and the cost was connection. And connection, for a human being, is survival. Alan Watts stepped into this conversation with his characteristic ability to find the sharpest edge of a truth and put it simply. Most people are not afraid of dying. They are afraid of living in a way that the people around them would not recognize as a life. And that fear, at the level of the nervous system, produces the same alarm signal as a predator. Because social isolation, for the primitive brain, is death. And any step that threatens your belonging to the familiar group, to the known pattern, to the standard of living of the people you love, triggers the alarm, not as metaphor, as actual biology. This is why you can know intellectually that you deserve more and your body can still sabotage the arrival of that more. It is not incoherence. It is the perfect coherence of a system that learned, at some point early in your life, that having more than the group means being expelled from the group. And expulsion, in the somatic map recorded when you were 6, 10, 14 years old, is equivalent to not surviving. Now let us do something together. And this is not a protocol. There are no days attached to it, no deadline, no tracker to fill out. This is something you can do right now, while you are driving, while you are walking the dog, while you are waiting for the coffee to brew. Call this the thermostat scan. Think of a change you have been wanting for a while: financial, relational, professional. Now, without analyzing, simply observe. When you imagine that change fully real, where in your body does the first sensation show up? In your chest, your stomach, your throat? Do not interpret it, just locate it. Now ask that sensation, not with your head, but as if the body itself could answer. What are you protecting? Let the first answer come. It will not be pretty. It will not be rational. It might be an image, a single word, a memory that seems completely unrelated to the change you want. That is the somatic map showing itself. And this may be the first time in your life you are not trying to shut it down. You are simply seeing what it has to say. You do not need to do anything with it right now. The simple act of seeing the map without immediately trying to destroy it begins to change the thermostat temperature. Because what the nervous system fears most is being ignored, and what it responds to most consistently is being acknowledged. Do this as many times as you want. In the car, in the shower, in line at the grocery store. Each time you do it, the map loses a little of its charge, and the new begins to gain a body, literally. Jordan Peterson has spent years arguing that order is necessary, but that life actually happens on the border between order and chaos. That the hero is not the one who lives entirely in the order or entirely in the chaos, but the one who can move into the unknown while carrying what is already known. The thermostat does not need to be destroyed. It needs to be recalibrated. And recalibration does not start in the will. It starts in the body recognizing that the new is not a threat. It is simply a map that has not been drawn yet. There is a finding that neuroscience produced in the last decade that, when you truly understand it, changes everything about how you see your own inability to change. And this finding is not in self-help books. It is in laboratories. Let us go there. In 2012, a research team at the Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience at University College London published a study on what they called prior probability. What they found is that the brain does not process reality objectively. It processes reality as a prediction machine. At every moment, the brain is generating a forecast of what is about to happen, based on prior experience, and filtering the sensory information coming in from the outside world to confirm that forecast. In technical terms, it uses the past as a mold to construct the present. This has a name: predictive coding, and it has an implication that most people never stop to consider. You literally cannot see opportunities for which you have no internal model, not as metaphor, as neurophysiology. If your internal model of abundance was built inside a scarcity environment, your visual, auditory, and somatosensory cortex will actively filter out evidence of abundance coming from the environment, because it does not fit the prediction. And evidence of scarcity will be amplified, because it confirms the model. Joe Dispenza has spent years translating this science into accessible language, and what he argues, backed by neuroimaging and electromagnetic field measurements conducted in collaboration with the HeartMath Institute, is that the internal state literally creates the field of probabilities that the external world will confirm, not as vague spirituality, as measurable physics. The human heart generates an electromagnetic field that extends between 3 and 10 feet beyond the body, and the frequency of that field, determined by the dominant emotional state, influences what the nervous system interprets as real, possible, and accessible. What Dispenza adds, and what is crucial for what we are building today, is the difference between intellectually memorizing a new state and actually embodying it, incorporating it at the cellular level. And here is the piece of this conversation I want you to carry out of this episode. Recent research in neuroplasticity, particularly the work of Tor Wager at Columbia University on the neurobiology of expectation, shows that the simple act of anticipating an experience activates, in the brain, the same neural circuits that the actual experience would activate, but only when that anticipation is accompanied by coherent somatic signaling, meaning the body is also present in the image, feeling it, not merely watching it from a distance. This has an extraordinary practical consequence we are going to explore in Chapter 5. But for now, hold on to this. The reason visualization alone does not work for most people is not because visualization is ineffective. It is because most people visualize with their heads and leave the body out of the room. And the brain, which is above all an organ of somatic mapping, does not register as real what the body has not signed off on. Hélio Couto, whose work explores the intersection of consciousness and quantum field theory, arrived at this same frontier from a different direction. The central premise is that each human being operates at a specific frequency of consciousness, and that frequency determines the field of possibilities they can access. The familiar is always the dominant frequency because it has more years of reinforcement, more cycles of repetition, more neural mass associated with it, and the new needs to be inserted into that frequency before it can manifest in the physical plane. What Couto calls quantum tuning is, in neuroscientific terms, precisely the process of giving the nervous system a dense enough, anticipatory experience to create a new somatic map that can compete with the old one. Carl Rogers, who spent decades studying what actually blocks human growth in therapeutic contexts, identified what he called conditions of worth, the unwritten rules we learn in childhood about which aspects of ourselves are acceptable and which need to be hidden so that love remains available. And what Rogers observed, with a consistency that made him one of the most cited psychologists of the 20th century, is that the actualizing tendency, the biological force that pushes every living organism toward its maximum potential, does not disappear when it is blocked. It turns against itself. It begins operating underground, creating patterns of behavior that look self-destructive from the outside but are, in their internal logic, acts of survival. You do not sabotage yourself because you are weak. You sabotage yourself because part of you is still operating by the rules of an environment that no longer exists. And that part does not know the environment has changed because it does not access the present. It accesses the map, and the map was drawn when you were 9 years old. If you have made it this far and you are feeling that specific discomfort of recognizing something you would have preferred not to recognize, you are exactly where you need to be. That discomfort is not resistance. It is the nervous system beginning to notice the gap between the old map and the actual territory. And in cognitive neuroscience, that gap is the first step toward updating the model. In the next episodes of this series, we are going into even deeper territory, the fragmented mind, the cycle of starting everything and finishing nothing, multitasking as a form of escape from the present. And you are going to understand why the inability to complete what you begin is not laziness, is not lack of discipline. It is the same thermostat we have been studying today operating at a different frequency. Do not miss what comes next. What is coming may be the piece of a puzzle you have been carrying around for years without knowing what it was. Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah was 34 when she hit what she described as the moment nothing made sense anymore. She had a stable career in marketing at a firm in Chicago. She was making good money by the standards of the family she had grown up in, a household where money was always a source of low-grade anxiety, quiet tension, and a specific kind of shame that nobody ever named directly. She was the first person in her family to own property before 40, the first to take a vacation that did not involve driving to someone's house, the first to have a financial cushion instead of a monthly scramble. And every time her life started getting measurably better than anything the people she loved had experienced, something happened. A relationship that fell apart without a clear reason. A promotion opportunity that she undermined in the final conversation, in a way she could not explain even to herself afterward. A business idea she had developed for 2 years that she quietly buried 3 weeks before she was supposed to launch it, with a justification so reasonable it convinced even her. Sarah was not lazy. Sarah was not afraid of success in the conventional sense. Sarah had a thermostat calibrated to the emotional temperature of the house she grew up in, and every time she exceeded that temperature, The system initiated a correction, not consciously. Her conscious mind wanted exactly what she said she wanted. But the somatic map encoded in her body, built across years of living inside her family's financial anxiety, inside the unspoken message that wanting more than your share is dangerous, inside the subtle signal that ambition puts distance between you and the people you love. That map operated with an efficiency that conscious willpower simply could not compete with. What changed for Sarah was not a decision, was not a course, was not a visualization practice she finally got right. It was the day she stopped fighting the system and started asking what it was protecting. And the answer that came, in the body before the mind, was belonging. The thermostat was not preventing her from having more. It was trying to guarantee that she would still belong to the people she loved. Because in her map, having more meant becoming someone those people would not recognize. And that kind of separation was not just emotional. It felt, in the body, like erasure. Now think about Marcus. Entrepreneur, 41 years old, based in Austin. Marcus had built 3 businesses in the previous decade. All 3 had reached a specific inflection point, always the same point where growth accelerated, visibility increased, and he began making decisions that, observed from the outside, made no sense for someone operating at his level. He would hire wrong, invest wrong, or he would simply start withdrawing his energy from the project in ways that only make sense once you understand that the body was retreating before the mind had the courage to admit it was afraid. Marcus's pattern was not financial at its root. It was identity-based. His father had attempted a large business when Marcus was 12 and had failed in a way that took the family years to recover from financially and emotionally. Marcus's somatic map had fused visible growth, not moderate growth, not safe growth, but growth that attracted attention, that exceeded what his father had achieved before the collapse with catastrophe. And the nervous system, faithful to the map. Every time the business approached the scale at which his father's business had started to fall apart, triggered the alarm. And Marcus, without understanding why, began making choices that ensured the story would not reach that critical point. Not because he was weak, because he was human, and because the map was faster than the plan. Both of these stories share something beyond the obvious. In both cases, the real shift did not begin with more willpower. It began with the recognition that the thermostat was not the enemy. It was a protector that needed a software update. And the update only became possible when the conversation shifted from "you need to stop this" to "you can rest now because the danger you learned." Fear does not exist in the world that exists today. Jung said that what you make unconscious governs your life, and you call it fate. Sarah's story and Marcus's story are exactly that, not fate. Unconscious architecture being seen, named, and over time, rebuilt. There is a detail that rarely appears in these transformation accounts and that I want to highlight because it is scientifically relevant. In both cases, and in dozens of similar cases documented in therapeutic and high-performance coaching contexts, the shift in pattern was not linear. The nervous system did not accept the new all at once. It tested, it returned to the old. It tested again. It created small relapses that looked like failure but were, from a neuroplasticity standpoint, exactly the process of negotiation between the old map and the new circuit being built. This matters because most people, when they relapse into an old pattern after a period of genuine change, interpret it as proof that change is not possible for them, when in reality it is the clearest signal that change is actually happening. The system resists most forcefully precisely when the new is close enough to represent a genuine threat to the old map. The relapse is not the end. It is the thermostat making one last attempt to hold the temperature it knows. And knowing that, in the body and not just in the head, is the difference between people who stop at the relapse and people who keep going. We have arrived at the center of what this episode was built to deliver. And now that you have the full architecture, the homeostasis, the somatic markers, predictive coding, the invisible loyalties, we can talk about the actual way out. not the way out that most content offers, which is essentially get out of your comfort zone with more courage and see what happens, but the way out that the neuroscience actually points to, the one that inverts the usual logic entirely. The problem is not that you do not want the new. The problem is that the new does not have a body yet. It has no somatic map, no registered frequency in the nervous system. And so every time you try to take the step, the nervous system treats that territory as unknown and therefore as threat. The solution, then, is not to force the step into the unknown. The solution is to make the unknown familiar before it exists in the physical world. To build the somatic map of the future with enough advance notice that when the future actually arrives, the nervous system already recognizes it as map territory and does not pull the alarm. This is what Dispenza calls being the mind of the future in the present. But today we are going beyond the formulation and into the exact biological mechanism by which this actually works. Tor Wager's studies on the neurobiology of expectation show that when the brain anticipates an experience with high sensory specificity, meaning not just imagine yourself being successful but feel it in the body, with full detail, the texture, the weight, the emotional temperature of that reality, the neural circuits activated are indistinguishable, in terms of firing patterns, from the circuits activated by the actual experience. In other words, for the brain, a vividly imagined experience with complete somatic engagement is, in terms of map updating, equivalent to a lived experience. This is not mysticism. It is the same mechanism by which elite athletes use motor imagery to improve physical performance without additional physical training, a phenomenon documented in neuroimaging studies since the early 90s. It is the same mechanism by which patients with phobia can reprogram fear responses through imaginal exposure therapy with somatic engagement. The body does not distinguish between the real and the vividly imagined. The map updates in both cases. Alan Watts, with that habit he had of arriving at the truth through the least obvious door, said that the future never actually comes. That what you call the future is always the present wearing different clothes, and that the only genuine way to change the future is to change the quality of attention you bring to the present. What neuroscience confirms, in different language, is that the present you inhabit most completely becomes your strongest map. And if you can inhabit, in the present, the somatic experience of the future you want, you are literally building the map that will guide the nervous system toward it. Hélio Couto speaks of tuning, adjusting the frequency of consciousness to match the field of possibilities you want to access. The principle is consistent with what neuroscience tells us. The internal state creates the perceptual filter that determines what you can see, feel, and access in the external world. And if you can hold that internal state with enough consistency and somatic depth, you are not just hoping for a different future. You are giving the nervous system a recognizable address to navigate toward. And now the exercise for this episode. No protocol, no days. No wait. Call this future inhabitation. At any moment during your day, at a red light, in the shower. In the 30 seconds between meetings, close your eyes if you can or leave them open if you cannot. And ask your body one question. What does it feel like to already be who I am working to become? Do not visualize the bank account, the car, the title. Visualize the internal texture, the quality of the air that person breathes, the weight they no longer carry in their shoulders, the ease with which they make a decision, the feeling they wake up with on a Monday morning. Now feel that in your body for 10, 15, 20 seconds. Not more, you do not need more. And then return to what you were doing. Do this as many times as you want. In the car, on a walk, before a meeting, before you fall asleep. It does not need to be ritualistic. It does not need to be perfect. It needs to be real in the body while it is happening. Because each time you do it, you are building a somatic map of the future. You are making the unknown familiar. You are giving the nervous system data from a territory it has not yet visited physically but is beginning to recognize. And when the nervous system recognizes a territory, it stops treating it as a threat. The thermostat will not reset overnight. But each time you inhabit the future in the present, you raise the temperature it considers normal by 1 degree. And there will come a point, not through force but through accumulation of maps, where the level you desire becomes the temperature the nervous system wants to maintain. And any drop below it will activate the same mechanism that used to pull you down, now pulling you upward instead. Rogers would call this updating the actualizing tendency. Dispenza would call it making the new familiar before it exists. Jung would call it integrating the shadow of the possible. And Peterson, who has that way of saying things that sound heavy but are ultimately an invitation, would say that you do not become who you are by accident. You become who you are by the quality of the ventures you dare to take into the unknown. And the most courageous step is not the physical one. It is the somatic one. It is the moment your body decides the future is safe before the future exists. This episode is the last before we move into Phase 3B, the fragmented mind. And what you found here today about the thermostat, about somatic maps, about familiarity as a filter of reality, is the foundation of what comes next. Because the next episode is going to reveal how the same mechanism that keeps you anchored in the familiar operates in a specific and devastating way inside the cycle of starting everything and never finishing anything. And you are going to recognize that pattern with a clarity that is going to be uncomfortable and liberating at the exact same time. One last thing before we close. If you made it here, to the final words of this episode, you are already in the minority. Most people drop off before the end. And that is not coincidence. It is the thermostat doing what it does, even in the consumption of content that questions the thermostat. The fact that you are here, at the last line, is evidence that your nervous system is beginning to accept the new map. That deserves to be acknowledged. Leave a comment below with the moment in this episode where you felt that recognition land in the body, not the head, the body. That answer matters more than you know, for you and for everyone who finds their way here after you. If this conversation was useful, share it with someone you know is stuck in the familiar loop, not because you want to fix them, but because sometimes the most transformative thing you can do for another person is simply show up and say, "I found a map. It might be useful for you too. I am the quantum architect." And you did not find your way here by accident.